The night Lowell Ashby announced his engagement to someone else. He did it with a microphone, a spotlight, and 300 witnesses. And Maren Doyle was standing close enough to count the buttons on his jacket. The grand terrace of the Whitmore Hotel smelled like old money and fresh flowers. Champagne moved through the crowd on silver trays. The gowns were architectural. The smiles were surgical. This was the kind of party where everyone was performing for everyone else, and the performance never stopped, not even when the cruelty was happening in plain sight. Maren had worn the blue dress, the one she'd bought 3 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon when she was still foolish enough to believe that tonight might go differently. It was a good dress. She knew it was a good dress. But the moment she walked into the Whitmore's marble lobby and saw the way Lowell's mother, Constance Ashby, looked at her, that slow, top-to-bottom appraisal that landed somewhere just south of contempt, Maren understood that the dress had never mattered. She had never mattered. Not to these people. Not in this room. She was 28 years old, a financial analyst with a mind that could dismantle a balance sheet the way a surgeon takes apart a watch. And she had spent 11 months believing that Lowell Ashby saw her, really saw her. Not the extra weight she carried, not the Target heels she'd swapped out for something borrowed and strappy, not the Louisville, Kentucky address she'd grown up at, where her mother still lived in the same house with the same yellow curtains. She had believed he saw her. She was wrong. The announcement came at 9:15. Lowell stepped up to the low platform at the center of the terrace and tapped a butter knife against a crystal glass, and the crowd gathered like water finding its level. He was tall and golden and practiced at being looked at. He smiled the way men smile when they've rehearsed it. "I have something I'd like to share with everyone tonight," he said, and his voice carried the easy confidence of someone who had never once doubted his own welcome in any room. "I've asked a remarkable woman to be my wife." He turned to his left. Sasha Fenwick stepped forward in a column of ivory silk. 31, old Connecticut money, cheekbones like architecture. She was, by every measurement this room recognized, perfect. The crowd erupted. Sham glasses lifted. Constance Ashby pressed a hand to her chest like she was accepting an Oscar. Maren didn't move. She stood near the far edge of the terrace, a half-full glass in her hand, and she watched the man who had kissed her goodbye that morning, standing in her apartment doorway, coffee still warm in the kitchen behind her, wrap his arm around another woman's waist and smile for the camera someone had produced from nowhere. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood very still and felt the particular devastating silence of realizing you were a placeholder. What she didn't notice in that moment was the man watching from the far edge of the room. He was standing near the window that overlooked the city, slightly apart from the nearest cluster of guests, with the stillness of someone who had no interest in performing. He was not what you would call traditionally handsome. He was something more unsettling than that, sharp-featured and dark-eyed, with the kind of face that made people instinctively lower their voices. His suit was charcoal, simply cut, and he wore it the way men wear armor, like it was designed to be forgotten while the person inside it was not. He had been watching the terrace since 8 o'clock, and he had been watching Maren Doyle specifically since 8:47, when she had quietly corrected the CFO of a mid-size pharmaceutical company on a capital gains calculation and then turned back to her drink before the man even realized what had happened. His name was Rourke Callister. What he was exactly was not something printed on a business card. The Callister name moved through certain conversations the way weather moves through a forecast, as fact, as force, as something you plan around. His grandfather had built the foundation. His father had cemented it. Rourke had done something far more precise. He had made it invisible. He had dismantled the loud, blunt machinery of his family's enterprise and rebuilt it as something else entirely, something that sat comfortably inside the legitimate world while retaining every ounce of the original power. He owned buildings and companies and debts. He employed people who were loyal in the way that only genuine fear and genuine respect, combined in equal measure, could produce. He had not attended this party because he enjoyed parties. He had attended because the Ashby family owed him something, and he liked to collect his due in person. He had not expected Maren Doyle. When the announcement was made, he watched her. He watched the precise, controlled way she absorbed the blow. No theater, no collapse, just that terrible stillness of someone holding everything together through sheer competence. He watched her set down her champagne glass with care. He watched her look once more at Lowell Ashby, a look that lasted only a second, and contained, he suspected, more intelligence and grief than the man on the platform deserved. Then he walked across the terrace. He positioned himself beside her without introduction, facing the same direction she was facing, looking at the same tableau of celebration she was looking at. "He's going to regret it," he said. Maren turned her head slowly and looked at him. "Excuse me, Ashby, he's going to regret it." He didn't look at her when he said it. He watched the crowd. Men like that always do. They choose the obvious thing, the correct-looking thing, and then they spend the rest of their lives being quietly bored. She studied the side of his face for a moment. "I don't know you." "No, I don't know you either." Now he looked at her, which is why this isn't pity, it's observation. Her eyes were a kind of grey that held light strangely, and they held it now in a way that was both wary and, he suspected, deeply, impressively tired of being underestimated. "Rourke Callister," he said. Something crossed her face. The name, landing. "Maren Doyle," she said, after a beat. "I know." She looked back at the crowd. That's either flattering or alarming, probably both. He reached past her and picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "I looked into you 3 weeks ago. Your firm pitched a restructuring analysis for one of my companies. The report had your name on page 2, but the thinking was yours. The language in the summary was different from the rest of the document, more precise, less careful about impressing anyone." Her chin lifted slightly. "You read the fine print. I always read the fine print." They stood in silence for a moment. On the platform, Lowell was still smiling. Sasha Fenwick was accepting congratulations. Constance Ashby had found Maren in the crowd and sent her one small, satisfied look before turning away. "Why are you still standing here?" Maren asked. "Because I want to offer you something," Rourke said. "And I'd rather do it now while you're angry than later, when you've had time to talk yourself out of listening." She turned to face him fully then, arms crossing loosely, weight shifting to one hip. It was not a defensive posture, it was an evaluating one. He noticed the difference. "I need a credible personal partner for the next 4 months," he said. "Events, dinners, a board meeting in March where my personal life will, unfortunately, be considered relevant. It's a transactional arrangement. You would have use of my guest suite, an allowance for appropriate appearances, and full discretion." He paused. "In exchange, you would be present, you would be yourself, and you would do the thing you already do naturally, which is make every other person in a room feel slightly less intelligent than they thought they were." Maren looked at him for a long moment. "You're serious," she said. "I don't make social conversation. Why me? Specifically. Because I don't want someone who'll perform the role. I want someone who makes it irrelevant that they're performing it. You walked into this party tonight in a room full of people who'd already decided what you were, and in 45 minutes you corrected Gerald Hoffman on a tax calculation, declined 3 invitations to discuss Lowell Ashby's feelings about you, and finished your champagne without spilling any of it. That's not a small thing." She was quiet. The city lights moved behind the window glass. "This is insane," she said. "I know enough. The rest is a calculated risk." He looked at her steadily. "You can say no. I'll walk away and we'll both pretend this conversation didn't happen. But if you say yes, I'll make sure that what happened tonight, the way he did it, here, like this, costs him something." She looked at Lowell one last time. He was laughing now, head thrown back, Sasha's hand in his, the whole world applauding everything he'd chosen. "What exactly," Maren said quietly, "does the contract look like?" The contract looked like 12 pages of precise, unsentimental language that Rourke's legal team had prepared in 48 hours. Maren read all 12 pages. Then she read them again. Then she found 3 terms she wanted adjusted and emailed her proposed revisions at 11:30 on a Wednesday night without apology for the hour. Rourke's lawyer called him the next morning. "She's sharp," the lawyer said, in a tone that suggested this was unexpected. "I know," Rourke said. She moved into the guest suite on a Thursday. It was larger than her entire apartment and overlooked the park, and she stood in the middle of it for a full minute before she allowed herself to sit down on the edge of the bed and feel, briefly, the full weight of what she'd agreed to. Then she unpacked her books and her laptop and her coffee equipment, the good grinder, the pour-over setup, the tin of Ethiopian beans she ordered every month, and she got to work. Rourke had not expected the books. There were a lot of them. He had not expected her to be awake at 5:30 in the morning either, sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open and her hair in a knot and a cup of coffee she'd made herself, reading something that made her frown in concentration at regular intervals. "You're up," he said from the doorway. "I'm always up at 5:30, she said, not looking up. "The analysis I do early in the morning is better than the analysis I do after 9. Something about the quiet." He poured his own coffee and sat at the far end of the island. They were silent for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was, in fact, the most comfortable silence Rourke had experienced in a considerable length of time, which was something he filed away and did not examine closely. Their first public appearance was a charity dinner at a rooftop venue in Midtown, 12 days after the Whitmore. Maren wore a burgundy dress that she had chosen herself, and she wore it with the confidence of someone who had stopped waiting for permission to take up space. She walked into that room on Rourke's arm, and she did not shrink. Not once. People noticed. That was the nature of Rourke Callister's presence. Where he went, people looked, and now they looked at her too, and it was a different kind of looking than she'd experienced in rooms like this before. It wasn't dismissal. It wasn't the appraisal Constance Ashby had given her. It was something more complex, the recalibration that happens when something doesn't match the expectation and the eye doesn't know where to land. At dinner, the woman on Maren's left, Claudette Barrow, wife of a hedge fund manager, a veteran of rooms like this one, leaned in with a smile that was both curious and calculating. "How long have you and Rourke known each other?" she asked. "Long enough," Maren said. "He's never brought anyone to one of these before, I know." Claudette's smile adjusted slightly. She had expected nervousness and gotten composure, and it threw her balance just enough. "What do you do, Maren?" "Financial analysis, corporate restructuring, mostly." She lifted her wine glass. "What I'm currently interested in is your husband's firm's Q3 exposure, but that's probably not dinner conversation." Claudette blinked. Then, slowly, she laughed. "You know about that. It's public information. I just paid attention to it." Rourke, who had been talking to the man on his right and had heard every word, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite admiration, but lived in the territory between them. After dinner, in the car, she looked out the window and said, "I talk too much." "You talked exactly enough," he said. She turned to look at him. Something in the quality of his attention made her pause. He was not looking at her the way she'd been looked at her whole adult life in rooms like that one, measuring, discounting, deciding. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a city they want to understand. "You're doing it again," she said. "What? That thing where you study something like you're going to have to rebuild it from memory?" He looked away. "Occupational habit." She turned back to the window. "For what it's worth, it doesn't bother me. I'm used to being invisible. This is the opposite problem, and I haven't decided which is worse. Being seen isn't a problem. Depends entirely," she said quietly, "on what the person looking at you actually sees." The board meeting was in March, as promised. Rourke's company, Callister Group, was navigating a merger that 2 members of the board had complicated feelings about, and those 2 members had, in recent months, made pointed comments about Rourke's personal stability. It was an old and ugly tactic, the idea that a man without a settled personal life was a man without settled judgment, and Rourke found it tiresome in the abstract and infuriating in practice. Maren sat beside him at the long table. She had asked, the night before, for a full briefing on the merger terms. He had given her everything, the projections, the risk analysis, the opposition's arguments. She had read it all by midnight and come to breakfast with 2 observations that his own advisers hadn't made. At the table, she was quiet for the first hour. She listened. She took notes. Small, economical notes in a leather-bound notebook she'd brought from her own bag. The board members who had looked at her when she entered and made their quiet assessments of what she was and why she was there had largely forgotten she was there by the second presentation. Then Harlan Priest, the senior dissenting voice, made a claim about projected cash flow that was technically defensible but contextually misleading. He built on it. He was good at this, the smooth and escalating construction of an argument on an imperfect foundation. Maren set down her pen. "Mr. Priest," she said, in the tone of someone who is not asking for permission to speak, but is extending a professional courtesy by announcing that she's about to. "The Q4 figure you're referencing assumes a 40-day payment cycle on the subsidiary contracts. The actual average over the last 6 quarters is 31 days. The difference materially changes your exposure calculation." The table went quiet. Priest looked at her. He was 64 years old and had been in boardrooms since before she was born, and his expression was the expression of a man who had not been corrected in a long time and did not enjoy the experience. "And you are," he began. "Someone who read the contracts," she said. "All of them." Rourke did not smile, but the particular quality of his stillness changed, in a way that the people who knew him would have recognized as the closest thing to joy he reliably permitted himself. After the meeting in the hallway, his CFO stopped beside him and said, quietly, "Where has she been hiding?" "She hasn't been hiding," Rourke said. "Everyone else has been failing to look." They were 3 months into the arrangement, and something had changed without either of them naming it. The guest suite was technically hers, but the line between her space and the rest of the apartment had come theoretical. Her coffee equipment had migrated to its own cabinet in the main kitchen. His reading chair had, somehow, acquired a second pillow. She had learned that he could not work to music, but could work to thunder. He had learned that she became unreasonable when she was hungry, but would rather starve than admit it, which required preemptive action. He left food near her laptop when she was working. She left the lamp on in the hallway when she went to bed before he came home. Neither of them discussed it. Lowell Ashby had not been silent. He had sent 3 messages over the course of February, each one carefully constructed to sound like concern while actually being reconnaissance. He wanted to know if Maren was all right, what she was up to, whether she needed anything. The 3rd message had mentioned casually that he and Sasha were having some challenges adjusting. Maren had not responded to any of them. What she hadn't seen was that Rourke had. Not directly, never directly. But Lowell Ashby's firm, which had been quietly pursuing a commercial lease renewal on a building in River North, found the renewal inexplicably stalled. The building's owner was unavailable. Alternative properties that seemed promising fell through. The timing was bad for Lowell. It continued to be bad for Lowell at a steady, almost geological pace. Maren found out on a Thursday evening in early March, when she was looking for a pen in Rourke's desk, and found instead a file that had no business being in a desk drawer, and every business telling her exactly what he had been doing for the past 6 weeks. She set the file down. She sat in the desk chair. She thought about it. When he came home at 7, she was in the kitchen, and dinner was on the counter, and she looked up and said, "The River North lease." He stopped. Something moved through his expression that she had learned by now to read as the equivalent of a long breath. "You went into my desk," he said. "I was looking for a pen. You should get a pen cup." He set down his bag. He came into the kitchen. He stood at the other side of the island, and they looked at each other across the marble counter, and he said, "I was going to tell you, were you? When it was complete." She studied him. Rourke, why? He was quiet for a moment. He had a way, when he was deciding what to say, of going completely still. Not the stillness of hesitation, but the stillness of someone choosing with care. "Because what he did was calculated," he said finally. "He invited you specifically. He made the announcement in a room where you would have no dignified exit. He timed it to inflict maximum damage because he thought you had no recourse." He looked at her steadily. "I disagree with that assessment." Maren stood very still. "That's not part of the contract," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked down at the counter. She looked back up at him. There were 11 months of something in her chest that she had been categorizing as hurt. And she realized now, standing in this kitchen in the apartment of a man who had quietly spent 6 weeks making Lowell Ashby's professional life difficult on her behalf, that she had miscategorized it. It wasn't hurt. It was the absence of being seen, and the absence was over. "You're not going to apologize for it," she said. "No, and if I told you to stop." He held her gaze. "But I want to be clear about something first. This stopped being a contract for me approximately 6 weeks ago. I would like to know if that's true for you as well." The city sat quiet outside the windows. The lamp in the hallway was already on, though neither of them had turned it on tonight. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "Because you came out of something that made you distrust the reasons people claim to see you. I didn't want to tell you. I wanted you to know." He moved around the island slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back. She didn't. There's a difference. She had spent 28 years in rooms that looked through her. She had worn the blue dress and been invisible in it. She had stood on that terrace and felt herself become a footnote. And now she was here, in this kitchen, with this man who had read the fine print and seen the language that was different from the rest, who had watched her absorb a public humiliation without a single crack, and thought, "That's not a small thing." "The contract," she said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the folder, the original signed copy, the one with her 3 amended terms in neat marginalia, and set it on the counter between them. "What you do with it," he said, "is up to you." She looked at it for a long moment, then she picked it up. She didn't tear it. She simply held it, feeling the weight of 12 pages and 4 months, and she thought about Constance Ashby's look in the marble lobby, and Lowell's practiced smile, and the 3 messages she hadn't answered, and the pen she'd been looking for in a desk drawer that turned out to contain something else entirely. She put the contract on the counter. "We should eat," she said. "The food's getting cold." Rourke looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. In the way she had learned was the thing that happened before something she'd said landed in him and stayed. "Yes," he said, "we should." Lowell Ashby's River North lease fell through entirely in April. He moved his firm to a smaller office in Evanston. The transition was, by all accounts, difficult. Sasha Fenwick ended the engagement in May, citing irreconcilable differences about priorities, which was the dignified version of the truth that people who know these things understand, involves a man who is constitutionally incapable of choosing what is real over what is correct-looking. The Callister Group merger closed in April, ahead of schedule. The board members, who had raised concerns about personal stability, found that their concerns were not subsequently discussed in polite company, because polite company had moved on to discussing the unexpected sharpness of Rourke Callister's new partner and the speed with which she had dismantled Harlan Priest's cash flow argument in a room full of people who'd been trying to do exactly that for 2 years. Claudette Barrow, at a dinner in June, leaned across a table and said to a woman she was trying to impress, "Do you know Maren Callister? You should. She's extraordinary." Maren, who was at the same dinner and heard this, said nothing about it until they were in the car home, and then she said, "She called me Maren Callister." Rourke looked at her. "I noticed," he said. "That's not my name." "Not yet," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, the city moving past the window behind him. lights catching in his expression in a way that she had, somewhere between the board meeting and the kitchen counter and the lamp left on in the hallway, stopped trying to analyze. "You read the fine print," she said. "Always," he said. She faced forward. The car moved through the city. Somewhere in Evanston, Lowell Ashby was reorganizing his office and wondering, in the vague, uncomfortable way of men who make choices based on appearances, why everything had started to feel smaller. Maren Doyle, who had stood at the edge of a terrace in a blue dress and been made invisible, had become the one person in this city that everyone was suddenly paying attention to. Not because of who she was standing next to, but because the moment she walked into a room, the room rearranged itself around her. She hadn't changed. She had simply ended up somewhere that finally had the sense to look.